Hey everybody, Rich Straffolino here with the Weekly Tech News Hour. Now, sadly, today, Monday, from 1 to 2 p.m., you will not be hearing the usual Weekly Tech News Hour. I, unfortunately, am not able to make the show this week. Luckily, Dr. Eric Charnofsky, who does Not Your Grandmother's Classical Music, has offered to come in and sub the time slot on WRUW. So if you're into classical music, guess what? You get another hour of that, unless he plays like death metal or something. I don't know. Maybe he decided to do that. I didn't want to leave the adoring fan, parentheses S, with no tech news content. One, if you want to just get the tech headlines, I also do a podcast called Daily Tech Headlines. You can check out every weekday, and on Saturdays I do a weekend review show, but I run down all the tech headlines in about 5 minutes. There's no real commentary on it. It's mostly just the facts, company announced X, yada, yada, yada. It doesn't really get into the implications of a lot of the technology, but it's really useful if you just want to stay up on the tech news. So feel free to subscribe to that if you are so inclined. You don't know about it yet already. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, though, was something that came out, and I thought was an interesting media story as much as a technology story. So when I woke up on Friday morning, I saw a bunch of headlines that said, Huawei unveils its Android killer, what it's going to do if it gets cut off from the Android ecosystem. This, of course, comes to light as a result of the trade embargo that's going on right now with Huawei. And there was the possibility that, they might be cut off from Android support proper, which would lead to all sorts of support problems and things down the line. So the issue I have with that is we've actually heard disclosure from Huawei, from various executives, that they had an operating system that they were ready to roll in place. Some were saying it was ready to roll in place tomorrow. Others were saying, it's more down the line. This is really more of an IoT thing, Internet of Things operating system that could be adapted to a smartphone over time, but not something we could just switch on overnight. But we hadn't really seen it yet. It was the big issue there. It was called HarmonyOS, which is Chinese for something, or I don't know. I'm probably butchering that, and I do apologize if you speak Chinese and you're insulted by that. I'm insulted that I can't say it better myself. We did finally figure out what it's going to be at their developer conference. Their CEO came out and announced HarmonyOS, which they're going to be calling it in places that don't speak Chinese and don't want to have people constantly apologize for mispronouncing it. And this is what I woke up to on Friday morning, right? People saying, this is their solution to Android. They're going to be able to roll this, no problem. The issue, though, was when I actually read the coverage, one, Huawei was super careful not really to mention this was really intended for smartphones. I think they only said the word phones or smartphones once during this entire presentation. And really, this is more of a long-term IoT play. In fact, the first products that are going to be having this HarmonyOS are going to be smart displays. They're talking about maybe putting it into AR and wearables and that kind of stuff. And really, it's more analogous to what Samsung does with their Tizen OS, which is what runs on their smartwatches run on, and a bunch of, I think some other smart TVs run on it too. But it isn't really something that's going to be applicable to the mass smartphone market. If anything, the first phones that might receive this or might be good targets for this, and I don't even know this, there's no confirmation from Huawei on this, is more of the feature phone market that we've seen really take off and find a real audience in markets like India, where smartphone adoption is taking off rapidly, but there are still huge numbers of people that just can't afford even a budget smartphone. But a feature phone still gives them access to things like banking, messaging, and vital services that are really important for the economies of those areas. So I could see that maybe being a more immediate play of getting into that feature phone game, where you really only have to have 2 or 3 apps, especially now that we're seeing applications, kind of these mega apps, where these messaging apps start taking on more and more functions. We've seen Line and WhatsApp and a bunch of other apps really take on new roles as being able to process payments and be things for public transportation and all sorts of other use cases outside of just messaging. You get your news from there, you pay all your bills from there, you get on the subway with that. Really important. Not that I don't know if there's subways in India. Maybe that seems presumptuous to me. Anyway, the point of all of this is this is not an Android killer in any way. Now, they did throw out some performance benefit of HarmonyOS, and to kind of scale it back here on a technical level, this is actually a very interesting operating system. It runs using something called a microkernel, which maybe doesn't mean anything to you, but if you're an OS geek, it's kind of a cool thing. The idea of a microkernel is not anything new. It's been floated around there for a while, and the idea is the kernel is the very core of the operating system, right? And previously, it was a lot easier just to throw a bunch of additional functionality that the operating system needs to do. Things like, I don't know, garbage collection or just really low-level stuff that an operating system needs to do, and put that all in the kernel. That means it's always in one place. You don't have to worry about adding in additional software packages kind of on top of that, which before the internet was kind of a big deal. You didn't want to have basic functionality like printers or stuff like that not be part of the kernel. Now that you can kind of download stuff on demand, connectivity is generally assumed. A microkernel has a lot of benefits, and one of the really interesting things about HarmonyOS is that there's actually no super user access or root access that's possible on the operating system because it's not part of the kernel. That's like an add-on, but that doesn't have any direct kernel access. That's a huge security problem, right? One of the big problems with a lot of IoT devices is that they run in what's called root. They give root access basically to all users on the system, where it's very easy to get back to root access. And once you have root, you can basically tell the system to do anything. So you can imagine not have, like, on an operating system level, not having that capability at all is huge for all of these IoT devices, especially ones that may not be getting updates quite all that much. Now, hopefully something like HarmonyOS would guarantee more timely security updates because it's coming from Huawei, who's a big giant corporation that does security things, but you never know. Some of the other cool things that as a result of that is, I didn't see if this was actually a real-time operating system or this would be still a scheduled operating system, but it has real-time-like functionality. And this has applications for where you would have resources that you need to allocate kind of on the fly, and it's supposedly doing some kind of smart analysis and distribution of system resources, things like RAM, CPU cycles, graphics, that kind of stuff, and proactively kind of putting it where it needs to be on a more immediate basis versus a more scheduled operating system like Android uses a very traditional scheduler for a lot of that allocation, and that can lead to bottlenecks down the road. Again, this is very nitty-gritty stuff, and that's why it surprised me that this was being framed as like, Android killer, when this was a really dorky announcement that Huawei came out with. It was at a developers conference. It was aimed at developers. So I feel like a lot of the headlines got ahead of it. Now, to all of these outlets' credit, once you read the article, it became very clear that this really isn't an Android killer or anything like that. But the headline, it got me to click on it, let's face it, and maybe I wouldn't have otherwise. But we're already seeing the first product is coming out. It is a smart display or smart TV or something like that from Huawei. Again, nothing too aspirational. It's going to definitely live in China, and this will be something that will have to grow as they go along. This isn't even really, it doesn't even feel to me that HarmonyOS is even at like a 1.0 level, because right now it's still shipping with a traditional Linux kernel, which broadens out the things that can actually run on HarmonyOS, as well as Huawei has another OS called LightOS, which, as you might imagine, is the lightweight operating system. There's another kernel from that kind of packed into HarmonyOS at this time. We're seeing that is going to be phased out in version 2, which is due sometime in the second half of 2020, along with better graphics support, which, again, not having graphics support means it can't compete with Android. This is not an Android competitor. I really hate that that was characterized as that, but what you going to do? So right now, HarmonyOS, interesting project. You might see it in more embedded systems or, operating systems, for smart appliances, IoT things, stuff like that. Not going to be seeing it in phones anytime soon. And that really fell out. Like I said, they mentioned that it's faster and more secure than Android, but what they were really targeting was things like Google's Fuchsia OS, which isn't even really out yet. Again, is another microkernel-based operating system. Isn't even really out yet. They're saying it's 5 times faster, and they're saying it's 3 times faster than QNX, which is really popular in automotive applications. So that's another situation where we might see HarmonyOS get adopted for, is maybe in some car infotainment systems. And that makes me think that their claims of having real-time operating system capability really have to play out, because if you're going to play in automotive, you can't have, like, when you hit the brakes, like, something doesn't happen, right? Or even press the radio button, you don't want a delay of that because it's cycling through some multitasking in a background app or something like that. So HarmonyOS, interesting thing from Huawei, isn't killing Android, probably won't be on phones for a number of years, if it ever is. So unfortunately, like I said, no regular weekly tech news hour, but that was your weekly tech, 7 minutes or whatever I edited this down to. So see you next week. We'll be back on WREW from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern time and in the podcast feed as well. I'm going to be publishing this on the Facebook, which you're already seeing it on the Facebook group. So I don't know why I mentioned that I'm publishing on Facebook, because that's where you're seeing it. Until next time, remember everybody, have a super sparkly day.